Slavery, slavery is the scourge of humankind. It has been with us. Well, we can't really establish a period when slavery wasn't there. And most poignant of all, it's with us now. I'm using a smartphone to take part in this conversation. I have on my desk, computers, and I know that the cobalt that's within the battery in my phone and in my laptop computer has almost certainly been mined by a child slave in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the people that were taking those videos are taking videos of statues being destroyed, other things being defaced, attacks on a British Holy of Holies like the Cenotaph, one of the most sacred places in the built landscape. And those were being filmed by people using mobile phones, but the people holding those phones were probably wearing clothes that had been made in sweatshops in other parts of the world by other living slaves. If this is to be a coming to terms with slavery, then I would deal with the plight of slaves who are alive today and worry about dealing with representations of slavers from the past, slavers who lived in other contexts in which, even the word racism didn't exist, and certainly not as we understand it. And if we're already making token gestures like taking down Faulty Towers and Gone with the Wind, then I do wonder and worry, and I am deeply anxious about the genuine motivations. Is this about addressing racism and the existence of slavery in our world community, or is it simply an attempt by anarchists, communists to eat into the built fabric of Britain and thereby to bring down British society?
It's time to take stock, I think, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to do so in the company of Neil Oliver, who is the presenter, of course, of The Coast Show, but he is also, by trade, an historian. He's an archaeologist. He's a man that knows an awful lot about the history of this country, the history of the world, and what we are currently seeing is a group of politically motivated anarchists attempting to change the history of this country, attempting to airbrush out the people they don't like from the history of this country and somehow present us with a very different formation of what we should be doing going forward, right? The relentless attempts by the mainstream media in this country to dislodge this government and to ask questions that are going to be awkward ones to answer have led us to this point, okay? Yesterday, Sadiq Khan gloated about the removal of a statue of Robert Milligan, a trader and slave owner from the 18th century who founded the docks at West India Quay in London's East End. Apparently, Tower Hamlets Council, which is also ram-packed full of lefties, basically said that they found the statue offensive, despite the fact they didn't find it offensive in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or indeed the noughties. So we're talking 50 odd years. They allowed that statue to stand. Suddenly yesterday they decided it had to go. Absolutely and utterly ridiculous. 0344 499 1000. We've also heard of some students up in Liverpool who want Gladstone's name removed from a hall of residence. Gladstone was one of the great liberals of this country, for heaven's sake. Where is this going to end? What are we going to end up doing to ourselves? I think it's a very dangerous time, and I think we need more common sense than ever. What we're seeing at the moment, Neil, is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
I certainly think it is. I certainly don't think that selectively editing the past is any way to, leading to any kind of productive and happy future. I certainly take a position where we need more history, more clues to history, more pages from the story, if possible. I say that you add to history, you don't subtract from it. When you run across characters whose morals you don't approve of, and you take them out of the context in which they lived, that's the early steps. I find it very concerning that this kind of behaviour is a step on the road that leads to to mob rule, to the tumbrils, to the guillotine. I watched the footage. And I was so troubled and astonished by it. We're modern 21st century people, and the statue came down and people were slapping it with their bare hands. And as it was being rolled through the streets, someone had tied a rope around the legs, as though it really was the person.
Yes.
And then it was ceremonially dumped into the into the harbour as though to drown him. Edward Colston lived and died 300 years ago. He died aged 84, tucked up warm in his bed, as far as I understand it.
After having committed many philanthropic acts, and including setting up hospitals, setting up schools for the poor.
Whether there's a process, if people do decide that they want to get rid of statues, if they want to get rid of anything, then there's a democratic process which is there to protect all of us at all times, and we cannot go to the point where self-appointed mobs are making decisions and acting upon them. It's all very harmless and good fun now when it's a bronze statue.
Yeah.
These are baby steps on a road that leads to catastrophic places.
Well, do you know, Kristallnacht was not far from my thoughts when I was watching that, because one thing I hate is a mob in any event. The second thing I hate is the police standing by and letting it happen. And, as I've said to many people since that moment, since that statue was torn down, what if they come to you next? They come to your house and they decide that you're some kind of horrible racist, and they drag you out of your house and they throw you in the harbour, because that's, I think, what we're all talking about here.
Yes, enough is enough. I think what has happened so far is too much. That process by which people are encouraged to think that they can be denouncing, in this instance, people from the past, but that's baby steps on a road that leads to people being encouraged to think that they can denounce family members, their neighbours, and that's what happened in Mao Zedong's China in the Cultural Revolution. 30-odd million people were hounded in that way. Ultimately 100 million people died in Mao's China.
Yeah.
And yet people feel happy and proud to wear T-shirts with Mao's face on them, even today.
Yeah.
Che Guevara, the iconic poster boy of communism.
Yeah.
Read the Motorcycle Diaries and see what he had to say about people of colour. If you want to question people's position on race, look at Che. And yet people feel delighted to wear a T-shirt or have a poster on their bedroom wall of Che.
Yeah. It's extraordinary.
And the architect of that whole system, the whole system of communism, socialism, that as far as we know, killed in excess of 100 million people in the 20th century alone. The architects of that were Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Read their correspondence, read their books, see what they had to say about people of colour and other races.
Yeah.
And in any event, the Gulag system in Russia that led to the deaths of, well, who knows, 50 million people, we don't really know, we probably never will. That was slavery. That was because it was understood pretty early on that the communist system would only work if it had forced labour, which is another word for slaves. And yet people still, there's no talk I'm seeing of people taking down statues of Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels. And I'm not saying there should be. I'm not advocating the removal of anyone's statue, because once you start, he who controls the past controls the future.
Well, I listen to
understand the most that we possibly can. Why are the cannons? Why are the guns being turned on individuals and the history of this country? I would like people to point at another country in the world where as many people have as much of a chance of a good life as they have here. This is an
people,
we know this, but
and people continue to flock here, Neil, from all sorts of corners of the world, because they believe Britain to be a fair country, a place where they do have a chance to succeed, regardless of their background, regardless of their religion, regardless of the colour of their skin. And you're absolutely right. But how much of this do you think is kind of pandered to by the left? And I have to say the left in this country, because that's what it is. We've got Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner taking the knee. We've got Labour MPs literally encouraging people to tear down statues. Sadiq Khan setting up a commission to nominate 60 statues that should be removed. We've got people like Lewis Hamilton talking about removing all evidence of any kind of racial discrimination in terms of monuments to anything in the world now, not just in Britain. And I mean, how much also is this down to the education process of some of these people who are now in their 20s who believe Britain to have once been an evil place?
This criticism that is going on at the moment is the product of a free country, and we arrived at this destination at the end of a long and bloody road.
Yeah.
We've been through terrible times nationally. We've been dreadful to each other, to our neighbours. We've also been spectacularly good at other times to each other, to our neighbours. But it's been a long and checkered story, and you don't get to edit it. I do wonder at the history education that's being made available. I mean, at the moment, as far as it stands, if someone was saying to me about going to university to study history, I would say you'd be better off getting a job and spending the money buying books.
Yes.
And educate. You can get as good an education in the subject of history from a good bookshop, but you should get to the bookshops fast, because this process by where certain things are being edited out, you know, a next step, another baby step along that dangerous road is the burning of books.
Yes.
I mean, you mentioned that certain comedy shows and films are being taken down.
Imagine removing Gone with the Wind, one of the greatest movies ever made and a great study of what happened in the Civil War in America, and now they're saying we shouldn't watch it.
This specific example of Edward Colston and his story, and people are saying, well, because of who he was and what he did, we think it's right, and MPs and journalists are standing by, if not cheering on.
Including the police as well, by the way.
What happened there? But that's not the way that these decisions ought to be taken. It's one thing if you think that it's happening to the right person today. Well, tomorrow it might be happening to your neighbour or your friend, and the day after that it might be happening to you. And if you have previously stood by and said, well, under certain circumstances the mob are entitled to take their own decisions and act on it, then your cries for mercy are more likely to fall on deaf ears if you have previously been part of the chorus of people saying that at certain times the mob can take the law into its own hands.